Yes.
Hello, my name is Alison Davis and I'm the chair of Milton Keynes University Hospital NHS Foundation Trust. It gives me great pleasure to welcome everyone to the annual members meeting, which for the second year running has to be held online. Unfortunately, the pandemic hasn't finished with us yet. Having joined the Trust in February this year, this is my first opening address at an annual meeting, and I'm very aware that this is a particularly unique occasion, because we were reflecting on the full impact the pandemic has had on our patients, our staff, our communities and our organisation. So much happened as the pandemic grew and huge changes impacted our lives. For example, the first national lockdown introduced at the end of March and the mandatory wearing of face masks for all health staff from June 2020, a measure still in force today. The idea of a vaccine for COVID in April seemed a long way off. And yet, only 9 months later, the first vaccines were being administered to patients and staff, many of which were given by members of Team MKUH at the Vaccination Center set up in the academic centre. We have played a key role as part of the biggest vaccination programme the country has ever seen. It was an extraordinary year for us and for the country as a whole. Joe Harrison, our Chief Executive, and Terry Whittle, our new Director of Finance, will shortly be providing fuller details of what was happening in the hospital and the effect of the pandemic. Alan Hastings, our lead governor, will update us about governor activities as well. But firstly, I want to acknowledge and thank staff for the truly amazing response they made to what was, at the beginning of the year, a little understood and unpredictable health emergency. Although I only joined at the latter part of the year, I have spoken with my predecessor, Simon Lloyd, and many others, and they have given me a picture of the selfless and dedicated actions of staff from all departments across the whole organisation to meet the constantly changing needs of seriously ill patients. From the incredible amount of extra cleaning trying to reduce the spread of infection, to the repurposing of wards and departments to deal with the numbers of those infected with COVID. We are truly grateful for all you have done. And being mindful of the toll the pandemic has taken on our staff, we are focusing even more on staff health and well-being with the opening of the Staff Hub and the 12 Weeks of Wellness initiative in early 2021. But it would be remiss of me not to also acknowledge that for many members of staff, there was additional personal impact as loved ones, friends and colleagues were affected by the virus. In some cases, our staff were affected themselves by the illness. To say their response went above and beyond is an understatement. I would also like to recognise how difficult it has been for patients and visitors coping with the necessary restrictions to help reduce the spread of the virus. For many, it will have a lasting impact, which will require support, but we are grateful for the understanding they have shown as we and the rest of the country attempt to tackle and contain the spread of illness. And of course, we know that many patients are still waiting for treatment that in normal times would have been delivered more speedily. And we understand the frustration and anxiety that this can cause. But we continue to look at and introduce all possible steps we can take to address the delays. Looking ahead, MKUH continues to lead the way digitally, which Joe will elaborate on. We can also look forward to the new Maple Centre, for which construction began in February 2021, part of our ambitious programme for improved infrastructure to meet future need for our services. We are also excited about our further developments with the Green Agenda, on which again Joe will elaborate further. I would also like to note that significant work was undertaken in connection with the planning of our Equality, Diversity and Inclusion Agenda, producing a strategy, structures and roles needed to take things forward. This is now progressing in 21-22, and we will be reporting that in more detail at next year's annual meeting. Similarly, work on the development of the BLMK integrated care system is moving forward, following the necessary hiatus with the COVID response, and this will be reported further next year. At this point, I would like to place on record our thanks for the continued fantastic partnership working that we experience with colleagues from organisations across our community and also with the public as well. The pandemic has challenged every one of us, but the way we have all come together in the most testing of times is something of which we can all be extremely proud. Before I move into the next part of the meeting, I would like to say a personal thank you to everyone for the warm welcome and support I have received since February. Starting in a virtual environment was certainly interesting, but I felt included and involved from the start. I would also like to thank our outgoing lead governor, Alan Hastings, who retires at the end of this month. He has been a great source of information and feedback from me personally, but more importantly, he has been unstinting in his support and advocacy for the hospital over many years. A valuable critical friend, I hope he will maintain his involvement in some capacity going forward. And lastly, a big thank you to the former chairman, Simon Lloyd, for his contributions to and support for MKUH during his term of office. I know his support continues as a member of the organisation. Thank you. And now I'm going to move on with this afternoon's agenda. Firstly, just to ask colleagues who are presenting, please don't forget to mute yourselves when somebody else is presenting. That'd be really helpful. Otherwise, we'll end up with some feedback. Thank you very much. Apologies for absence. I have on record Heidi Travis. I don't know if Kwame, if you're there, if there is anybody else. No, I take that as just Heidi Travis. Thank you very much. Then for the minutes of the meeting from last year, is just to draw it to everybody's attention that these are on our website, and in our chat box there will be the link. We would just ask that if anybody reads them through and finds any inaccuracies, please could they let us know within the next 48 hours, and subject to those, we will then approve those minutes from the last meeting. Thank you very much. Now, my next duty is a governance update, and that's in terms of appointments and people stepping down from our governing body and also from the board. Firstly, obviously, new non-executive director myself, starting in February 2021. New executive directors also starting during that year, Terry Whittle, our Director of Finance, and Jacqueline Collier, Director of Transformation and Partnerships. Leaving the board in the same period was obviously Simon Lloyd, our previous chairman, Professor John Clapham, who was a non-executive director, Michael Keach, Director of Finance, and Sophia Aldridge, who was the interim Director of Finance after Michael stepped down, or well, moved on. From the governing body, we had new starters during that period. In the public domain, Emerson Valley, Furston and Loughton Park is Jordan Coventry. For staff side, scientists, technicians and allied health professionals, Yolanda Potter. Again, on staff side, nurses and midwives, Elizabeth Mausch and Tracy Rea. And on staff side, non-clinical staff groups, Emma Isted and Piran Salter. So welcome to all of them. And one governor stepped down in 2021, Michaela Tate, governor for non-clinical staff. Thank you very much. Hopefully I've covered everybody, and that covers the governance side of the meeting. And I now warmly welcome Joe to do his presentation. Thanks, Joe.
Thank you very much indeed, Alison, and welcome to everybody. For those of you that don't know me, hello, my name is Joe Harrison and I'm the Chief Exec here at Milton Keynes University Hospital. So if I can start by talking through the values that have driven us over the last 12 months of the year of 2021. And I think at such a challenging time for our organisation as a whole, the ability to care for our population and at times communicate in very, very different ways, working across the health and care system, not just in Milton Keynes, but across the region itself, and doing our bit to ensure that we kept our population safe and as healthy as we possibly could. I think those values really did shine throughout what was a very challenging year that I will talk about. Moving on, the strategy that underpins what we do here is very clear, that we want to provide high quality care. We do that in the context of looking after our workforce and making sure that we focus on the health and well-being of our workforce and the education and training to support the development of individuals. We continue to focus on research and development for our population, and we are very clear that one of our biggest challenges is developing our hospital facilities at a time when our population is growing and the way that medicine is delivered continues to change. The relationships that we have with our specialist and tertiary care centres continues to improve, and our place, not just within Milton Keynes, but across Bedfordshire, Luton and Milton Keynes, our integrated care system has continued to be strengthened with the relationships that we have. And so what I will do is go on to talk about the objectives that we have focused on. Again, quite challenging. It's not been a normal year, 2021, but those top three around making sure that we keep our patients safe, finding very different and innovative ways to ensure that our patients experience the best possible care, and continuing to push the boundaries to improve the clinical effectiveness that we provide in our organisation, whilst also focusing on those other elements that you see there around our estate and our workforce and so on. So if I look at the year in numbers, it's again a very, very different year. I never thought in my career that I would be saying that emergency department attendances decreased by almost 20%, when every year, year on year here, we have seen an increase. And in each of those categories, you see that there are lower numbers than you would expect for an organisation that has grown consistently over those years. The good news from our perspective is that whilst a number of services did have to considerably slow down or indeed pause, we were able to treat a number of elective planned patients, both in outpatients and as inpatients and day cases, and that is particularly the case for some of our cancer patients who we were able to treat. So a very different year in numbers, and one that in the nicest possible way I hope I don't see mirrored in any future years. The pandemic really did have a big impact on what we were doing. So let's move on to talk about the impact on activity. We know that during the peak of the pandemic here in our hospital, we had over half of our available beds occupied by individuals who were COVID positive. I've talked about how we used our new cancer centre, and I'll talk about that in a bit, to continue to treat patients. And we also really benefited from the investment that we've seen in digital technologies to mean that we were able to continue to see patients either in their own home by the use of telephone or remote video link, or indeed for our clinicians to be able to continue to input into patient care by being able to see patient records at home. So a very, very different experience for both our patients and the team here. And as I say, I think our main focus, which I'll come on to, is how do we ensure that the volume of planned care increases significantly over the next few years to cope with the backlog that built up over that period of time. So if I look at the impact of COVID on our community, I know that a significant number of individuals and families within Milton Keynes and the surrounding areas that we serve were impacted by the restrictions that we had on visiting. And interestingly, we learnt a lot. We learnt a lot through the pandemic about how we could use both technology and also learn from the best infection prevention and control measures to try and enable people to stay in contact. And one of the things that really did shine was our letters to loved ones service that we put in place that allowed individuals and people, members of the family, to deliver items to patients safely in a very, very restricted environment. Virtual visiting, as I say, we're using devices, fantastic. And I have to say a big thank you to our community who really did support the team here at MKUH throughout the pandemic, delivering all sorts of goodies very frequently across the organisation, which was so very well received by our staff here. A big thank you to that. But it hasn't gone away, and we continue to have face masks on, and we continue to ensure that we maintain social distancing and infection prevention control measures. And I really do hope that you will continue to support us throughout this period as we deal with the lingering effects of COVID. One incredible success that we did have, and that really contributed hugely to keeping our population and the team here safe, was the Vaccination Center. I'd like to say a big thank you to Danielle Petch, our Director of Workforce, who stepped forward, or is it everybody else stepped back? I can't quite determine, but she stepped forward to take on the unenviable task of running the Vaccination Center with her team. And some incredible statistics there, delivering over 35,000 doses of the Pfizer BioNTech vaccine. And we were one of the first 8 vaccination centres in the country to open. And again, that's testament to the way that we were able to set it up, plan it, get it open, and run it in an incredibly smooth way. And it's still open today. Coincidentally, I went for my booster vaccine at 9:30 this morning. And so if there are people out there that have not had their booster, please do make sure you go and have it. And you also have the opportunity to get your flu jab. So we do want to encourage everybody to have their booster jab. So that was a fantastic success, and a big thank you to everybody that was involved, as I say. Moving on to the impact of COVID on our staff, it was and interestingly continues to be a very, very tough time for everybody working in the NHS and health and care more broadly. But what we saw here was a Herculean effort from a significant number of people here who worked long hours, sometimes in really, really challenging conditions, whether it was full PPE, whether it was in areas that were isolated, very, very challenging. And don't forget, we know an awful lot more now about COVID-19 than we did when our staff first stepped up and started dealing with this. And I don't think anybody should underestimate the bravery and the courage of individuals and teams here to look after the patients in the way that they did. I won't go through each of the bullet points on the slide, but what we did do as an organisation was try to ensure that we supported our staff in the best possible way, whether that was through our new staff hub that we put in place that gave individuals and teams just a place of quiet, calm, tranquility so that they could get away from it all, or whether it was the helpline that we put in place, the additional focus on health and well-being to make sure that individuals could be supported and were supported through, as I say, certainly some of the most challenging times in my career, and no doubt in other people's as well. So a big thank you to everybody that was involved in getting that staff support in place. And as always, our team here, the people who work in our organisation, are our most valuable asset. And we continue, only this afternoon we're having a conversation about how best we can support staff to ensure that the team here are best able to look after the patients, carers and families of the population that we serve. Moving on to staff engagement, one of the things that we are very clear about here is that we do listen and we do want to hear from individual members of staff, teams, about how we can improve working here in our hospital. We held our annual staff event, the event in the tent, as a virtual conference this time, which as always has its pros and cons, and good that sessions were recorded and lots of people were able to listen outside of the events themselves. Obviously disappointing in that those conversations that always get had around the water cooler weren't able to be had. But a very positive event, a very worthwhile event where we did have hundreds of people getting involved and being part of that engagement. So well done to everybody involved in that. Excuse me, that's not a COVID cough, I can assure you. Moving on, the digital advances we've mentioned a couple of times already. And what is clear is that we continue to be at the forefront of digital technology across the NHS. The steps that we've taken to ensure that our clinicians can access patients' notes appropriately in a virtual environment have continued. We also have made a very big step forward to enable our patients to access more and more information on their mobile devices. So now we are able to send letters and contact patients through our MyCare portal. We have over 100,000 people now using that portal for our hospital. And not only that, but that technology has now been taken up by a further 24 other trusts in the country. So it's technology that we helped to develop and is now being used by significant numbers of organisations, which is great news. We continue to invest in our electronic patient record, and we are now in a situation whereby almost all of our data is electronic, with the only areas outstanding, or the only main area outstanding, being outpatients, which will go next year. Again, I think things that we now take for granted. We were able to move to Teams technology, which some might say is a curse in disguise, given the amount of time we sometimes spend on it each day. But that ability to communicate to the organisation, whether individuals are working remotely or indeed in the organisation, has been fantastic. And a huge thank you to particularly the IT team, who have worked tirelessly behind the scenes to make sure that we continue to be able to use technology and digital technologies for the best interests of our patients and the team here. And that final point there, that virtual library, putting all patient leaflets live on our trust website. We know that not every patient can access digital technology. This for us is very much about giving individuals choice. It's very much about enabling individuals to choose whether they access it digitally or indeed want to receive paper. So it is making sure that we do that. And then clinically, one of the best advances we've seen is that we became the first hospital in Europe to use robotic surgery for major gynecological surgery. I should stress straight away, this is not just a robot that is doing the operating. It is the consultant is in the room and is operating the technology to enable that to happen. We also became the first hospital in Europe to trial an app to assist hip and knee replacement patients. So this isn't just about being the best in the NHS. This is about striving to become the best in Europe, if not globally, in the technologies that we're using. And I'm delighted to see that our partnerships with other technologies continue to develop. And only this morning I heard of another technology that we're using has just won another award, which is fantastic. Those advances will continue, and we will continue to invest in making sure that we have the best clinical care here in Milton Keynes. Moving on, going to our estate development. For those of you that are, I would say, unfortunate enough to come to site at the moment, given that we're still very limited on visitors, it would mean that you're a patient. We have continued with our estate development. The Maple Centre next door to the emergency department has sprung up out of the ground and is due to open towards the end of 2022. It is a significant two-storey space that is being built that will provide assessment spaces as well as a further inpatient ward, and really will give an opportunity to look after our patients in 21st century accommodation, which is fantastic. And that building is, as is usually the case here, on time, on budget, and is expected to open, as I say, at the end of 2022. Talking new developments, we're now a year on. Time flies when you're having fun. A year on from the cancer centre opening, and this came into its own during COVID. It absolutely enabled us to continue to see patients with cancer in a safe in safe environment and to look after them away from the main hospital and emergency department. And we know from all of the feedback that we're getting from our patients, visitors, from the Macmillan Cancer Trust, who have recently assessed it as being 5-star, that it really is an outstanding facility, and it's done us proud over the last 12 months since it's been open. So that's a positive to celebrate, and we expect the Maple Centre to be able to deliver the same level of improvement in our facilities. We're nearly there. But we can't move on without talking about research and development. I'm delighted to say that for the 3rd year running, we were the top recruiting acute trust, easy for me to say, for an organisation of our size. And what that means for us is that we are able to offer the population of Milton Keynes access to the very latest research trials, the very latest research that's going on. And we were given £750,000 from the National Institute of Health Research to continue with our portfolio research this year. We also picked up a significant number of studies during COVID, and that really was looking to drive research into COVID and best possible treatment methods for that. And so very, very real, very, very present in terms of getting involved in the pandemic. So a big thank you to the research team as well. So I think I now get the delights of handing over to Terry to give us the financial review. Over to you, Terry.
Thank you, Joe. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Terry Whittle. I'm the Director of Finance at Milton Keynes Hospital. I joined the Trust in February this year, so it's my first annual members meeting. If we go to the next slide, I'll just start talking us through the obviously the position in the financial performance of the hospital, but also some key changes that were brought about to the NHS's funding regime on the back of the pandemic. What this slide here shows us, so as you've heard from both Joe and the chair, COVID really did dominate the business of the NHS and hospitals during the last year. This slide I think is quite interesting context, hopefully. So it's from one of the health think tanks, and it really does show at an overall NHS England level the impact that the pandemic has had on the resourcing of the NHS. So what these bars show us for an overall England position is a kind of incremental trend of increasing funding from about 2008-9 right the way through to the year that we were in the dark purple bars. And what you can see in the lighter shades of purple, both for the last year that we've just closed down, 2021, and indeed the year that we're in now, 21-22, the level of additional funding that was given to the NHS. So the original plan, in terms of a non-pandemic plan, the NHS was expected to get about £150 billion of funding, and it ended up spending about 212 billion, so over 40% extra. So it really does show the kind of warlike impact that the pandemic has had on the NHS. If we just go to the next slide, again, so this is the last one of context. So when we look at the position for the overall government funding that was required to respond to the pandemic, over £250 billion of unplanned resource was needed to mobilise a response across different governmental departments to respond to the pandemic. What we can see in that pie chart, so the red section of that, the Department of Health and Social Care, of which the NHS is clearly a large part, received about a fifth of that extra funding, and that was being targeted towards things like personal protective equipment for clinical staff working on the front line, all of the extra costs for enhanced cleaning regimes, test and trace programs. So it really was quite an exceptional period for us in terms of the finances of the country. If we move on to the next slide. So just to do again a bit of context setting, and then I'll get into the Milton Keynes numbers. What this slide tries to do is just give a bit of a picture for the changes that were brought about to the financing regime that exists within the NHS. So on the back of the pandemic arriving, there was an immediate suspension of all of the usual internal market mechanism for buying and providing services that exist in the NHS, and that was replaced, as you can see here, with a very, very heavily centralised government funding arrangement that basically underwrote the cost of running a hospital. The main reason for that was to ensure that there was sufficient money and indeed cash available to make sure that we were able to promptly pay suppliers and keep the operations of the hospital running without cash flow and other issues becoming an issue. Some other points just to draw some attentions to. So we were having to work in ways never before seen with the independent sector, so private hospitals, to make sure that we had some safeguards and resilience to things like elective care provision. So we really were working in different ways. There were national contracts that underpin that arrangement. And indeed, there were things put in place by the Cabinet Office to make sure that resources and monies were moving around very, very swiftly between public and private institutions. So again, a quite remarkable regime, and we've gradually seen, coming off the back of last year and going through this year, an evolution away from those exceptional arrangements. But just to give you a bit of a flavour there. Next slide, please. So yeah, moving on to the Milton Keynes Hospital performance. The sort of summary bullet points that narrate this slide on the left hand side, I suppose the one that's at the bottom here that just talks about the exceptional regime, just to draw out, because we do see some historical trend information here, the effects of the exceptional regime that were put in place do make year-to-year comparisons of financial performance and the like, which we commonly talk about in these types of presentations, less meaningful than they would clearly in times of non-global pandemic. So although we've presented the information, as you can see here, the figure that we're reporting on the very right hand side of that graph, which is the surplus position reported by the hospital for 2020-21, is a direct result of the intentions of the national funding regime. So as I move on to that, just a few technical points to get up front. In terms of the preparation of the accounts of the hospital, there are a number of things we have to do in terms of our stewardship of public money. The first of those is to make sure that the accounts are prepared on a going concern basis. So in summary terms, that means that the executive and management of the hospital have reason to believe that the business provision of the hospital will continue to be met and provided in the future, and we did form that conclusion. The accounts themselves are prepared in a way that makes them compliant with the Department of Health and Social Care reporting manual, and indeed there's supplementary guidance that applies specifically to foundation trusts, and our accounts were compared on a consistent basis with that guidance position. Following the review of the independent audit team, we were given an unqualified audit opinion. That means obviously that our independent audit partners, so Deloitte for ourselves, were able to conclude that the basis of preparing the accounts was undertaken on a fair basis, and the figures that we see in front of us here today, and indeed the full annual accounts, are appropriately reflective of the performance of the hospital during the last year. So with that said, the hospital during 2021 ended the year with a cumulative surplus position of about £400,000. Beneath that aggregate position, what we saw was a real increase in the amount of operating income that we received as an organisation. The key driver for that was additional funding provided centrally by government to make sure that we had resources in place for the additional pay cost in terms of sickness and additional hours that we were asking and requiring staff to work, the impact of things like the cost of untaken holiday from staff, clearly. So there was a lot of extra funding coming in to make sure the hospital was able to sufficiently cover the costs that we were incurring for exceptional items. At the same time, and in the areas that I've just touched upon, the operating expense of the hospital rose, and again for things like enhanced cleaning regimes, the costs and some of the productivity challenges that we saw when we were having to reconfigure clinical care pathways to make sure that services were being provided in a safe and effective manner for our patients, all bring with them financial challenges, and the government was able to underwrite the course of those costs for the hospital. Next slide, please. So what this shows, and I think you've heard previously from Joe obviously about some of our strategic aspirations and the investment we're making in both medical equipment and facilities for our staff. What we're showing here in the top picture is an artist's impression of the Maple Centre, which is going to be looking at providing an enhanced ambulatory care type offer for our local population at some point mid to late next calendar year. There was a lot of disruption caused at various stages of the last year because of the pandemic around big construction programs. So a very, very practical issue clearly is that we needed to convince ourselves and make suitable alternative adjustments to the working arrangements of colleagues coming on site to do construction works to, again, not endanger anybody in terms of their exposure and transmission of the pandemic. So very practical challenges like that slowed down the pace of some of these building programs and meant that there was an awful lot of focus, momentum and energy being applied towards the end of the finance year to make sure that we could recover and catch up on some of those impacts that we experienced during the year. In the same token, we invested heavily and at quite some pace in terms of some of the medical equipment. So you can see a few examples on here in terms of diagnostic equipment for both imaging and indeed some of our endoscopy services. I think we're very proud at Milton Keynes Hospital, and rightly so, around our environmental credentials and how seriously we take our green responsibilities. A good example of that is shown in the bottom picture there, where we were able to utilise some additional funding that became available to start inserting solar panels on some of the roofs of the buildings that we have here, to mean that we're starting to take responsible steps in terms of our energy consumption towards the future. Next slide, please. So very, very clearly, there was a real recognition, I think, through charitable streams, not just for ourselves, obviously, but in wider society. Big examples like Sir Captain Tom's efforts and the huge sums that were raised because of very, very admirable efforts up and down the country, and our own charitable team were very, very agile in the way that they responded to the the huge inflow of sympathy, support that we were receiving from our community, be that through gift donations, food, products and services for our staff to make sure that we were considering people's health and well-being and maximising the support that was available for staff, and also in a kind of hard sense in terms of the financial contributions we were receiving. What we've shown here on the right-hand side, and we've just very recently had an audit opinion on these accounts, is a summary of the donations received through 2021 and indeed the net expenditure position. And what you can see there is that we received just shy of about £700,000, which I think is outside of significant individual campaigns, for example, things like the Cancer Centre, a record level of charitable funding donations received by Milton Keynes Charity. So a real standout year for the organisation in this sense. We were able to reinvest about £500,000 or so of that funding sum received to give us a net movement in funds of about 138 that we see on the table on the right hand side. What we've tried to do, just give you a bit of an indication and flavour of some of the things that we were spending that money on, is just show on the left hand side some of the very great initiatives that we've been targeting that money towards. As you can see, there's a combination there of both medical equipment enhancements to mean that we can improve the offer, quality and satisfaction of the services that we give to our patients when they're in receipt of our services, and indeed some environmental improvements through things like the artwork, upgrades and investments in some of the garden and the outdoor facilities to really improve the feel of the environment for our staff that have been working incredibly hard in very stressful and pressurised times. So really fantastic use of those funds. And what I'll say next, but it spoils the surprise for what we've got coming next year, is that we've continued on that vein, and during 21-22 we're very excited about an ongoing investment we're now going to be making in areas like enhancing the staff restroom facilities for our staff across the organisation. So we really are continuing the momentum that we picked up during last year into the year that we're currently working. Next slide, please. So just to close from a finance standpoint, what I've outlined here is a few notes in terms of where we are at the moment and the focus for this year and indeed beyond. So you would have clearly picked up from general sort of current affairs and the flavour of what we've been talking through earlier on this afternoon, that we continue, albeit that the transition of the response for COVID services has now moved on from a very much sort of acute focus, intensive care reliant service to something that we need to retain a level of readiness in terms of peaks out in the community and ongoing surveillance through testing programs. So we continue to evolve the offer that we need to have in place for COVID services and the resources that requires. Most notably, we're trying to reinstate a much higher level of planned care offer to mean that we can start to make some serious inroads into some of the waiting lists that have built up because of the impact of the COVID through 2021. So there's a lot of investment and focus going around that in the current year. Equally, there's large scale kind of monies and investments being made around our capital programme to give us greater resilience and bandwidth in terms of our diagnostic capabilities, and also some big improvements that we would like to bring online to enhance the theatre's offering. So there's a lot being worked through in the current year, and that will continue to be an ongoing focus again through 22 and 23 and beyond. Finally, that's the last but certainly not the least point on this slide. I'm sure some of you have seen in the newspapers and on the TV headlines and things, there's a big bill going through in legislative terms from the government at the moment that is looking to bring about some structural reform to the NHS and the way that it's run at a local level, and we're obviously engaging in that process very actively and working with partners across Bedford, Luton and Milton Keynes to make sure that we're driving value and working collaboratively to maximise the use of resources for our population in the current year and beyond. I'll pause there. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Terry. I'll come back. I know there are a couple of questions appearing. Sorry, I'll just wait to have the box come back on me. Thank you very much. Thanks, Sam. I know there are a couple of questions appearing in the chat box. Thank you very much. And I'll come back to those at the end. I'm sure there's a lot of information there, Terry. I think people will digest it and probably come back. So thank you for that presentation. Moving on now, I'd like to welcome Alan Hastings, our lead governor, outgoing lead governor. I'm not sure if you were here earlier, Alan, but I did say thank you very much for everything you've done. So, but I will catch up with you anyway. But I'll hand over to you now. Thank you for your presentation.
Okay, thanks, Alison. I did in fact hear that, and I was very pleased. Thank you. It was a nice thing to hear. Right. Good afternoon. I am Alan Hastings. I'm lead governor at Milton Keynes University Hospital, and I have the honour to be an elected public governor and lead governor. But I'm now nearing the end of my second 3-year term. Next slide, please. I'm not going to go through and read all these things because everybody's capable of doing that. And I've had so many PowerPoint presentations in the past where people just read it, I just lose interest. Okay, so the one thing I'll add to the first point there is that we've continued meeting virtually on Teams and on virtual on a computer, and which has been very successful, although nowhere near as good as face to face, of course. I think on the next comment there, before you go, can I just go back? Thanks. The most important thing there, I think, to say is about warmly and applauding and thanking every member of staff. I know we've all seen the tremendous efforts that the frontline staff in particular have done, but when you start looking around and seeing things, well, like cleaning staff and the support staff in the on the non-clinical side, everybody has really done their job and more so. Thanks very much. Moving on. Right. As you can see there, we've got 26 governors. We've just recently had a set of elections, and we now have 4 new governors. And just quickly saying that, and I'll welcome them in a minute. Oh, I think that's the next slide. Try the next slide, please. Yeah, we welcome our new governors. Sorry, I'll catch up in a minute. We have Martin Nevin, who replaces me for Bletchley, Denbigh, and just about everywhere else around the quarter, if you take the Standing Way and Watling Street, we cover just about everything in that area below that. We have Shirley Moon, who replaces Brian Linton, Deborah Lewis, who's replacing Ekrub Kular, and Stevie Jones, who is replacing David Barber, who I think is the non-clinical staff. As it says there, all governors are unpaid and volunteers. So the main thing about that is it does ensure our independence. Right, move on, please. Right, here we go. Council of Governors. Yeah, we have various statutory duties which are required by law, and I think that's very important to remember. And I think it's quite straightforward there. We hold the non-executive directors to account for the performance of the board, and we always represent the interests of patients and members of the trust. And I stress the word our, as every member of staff I've met and our governors think of it that way. It's our hospital. And of course, we have to talk about it as trust because that's, I think, a legal term, but everybody that uses the hospital would refer to it as the hospital, our hospital. Right, move on, please. I think this stands out from just about everybody that's associated with things that support our people, not just people in the hospital and so on, but these are our 7 Nolan principles that we have to abide by, and I think they're very sensible. And I'd like to think that personally, I'm okay with all of those. I try to do my best anyway. Now, one of the things that I'll add to this is that all the governors are subject to the DBS checks, disclosure and barring service, as we come in contact with patients, vulnerable sections of the community, and in some cases, children. As lead governor, I'm also the point of contact with the NHS should they require access to the hospital separately from the executive. In my terms of office, this has never been needed. Moving on, please. Yeah, we meet 5 times a year, and the important one there also is the informal meetings that we have with the chair, with Alison, and also Alison and I have regular discussions. I won't say particularly meetings, but regular discussions about certain things. And one of the things that I was able to do, hopefully for Alison, was help her settle in and fill in some of the background of the job that she took on. Our last meeting of the informal formal meeting was last Friday on the 29th, and these meetings can and do cover a very wide range of subjects. Under the Appointments Committee, which as lead governor I chair, I'm delighted to say that we decided, I don't want to say selected. Anyway, we picked Alison, and she's been brilliant. She's settled in very well. She's very patient-centred, and I feel we made an excellent appointment. So thank you, Alison, for joining us. And I think the last point there, I would just add that, and I think it's been made, the point's been made before, our role can be summed up as being a critical friend. So the governors are a critical friend of the hospital. Right, Council of Governors, next one, please. Right, you can see there's various reports and so on that we receive, and the annual report and accounts, we had recently, the governors recently had to give prior approval to the accounts before they're submitted to I think the NHS or the Department of Health, I'm not quite sure which, but and Terry went through that with us and gave us the background so that we had some chance of understanding what all the figures meant. But I think Terry's made it very clear that we are doing a lot and doing very well. Under the Clinical Excellence and Staff Awards, one of our governors is a member of the group that looks at the various people that are put forward for that. And I know from talking to Anne that this is a difficult task, as there are so many people who warrant consideration. So I haven't been involved in that, but I think that's a very difficult task. Going on through those, the second from bottom there about the Lead Governors Network. This is a group of lead governors from 16 of the foundation trusts, trust hospitals, and covers the area from the Wash down to the Thames, and from in the north to the south, and east to west, west to east, east to west, west to east. I'll get it right, sorry. Is from Kettering in the west to the North Sea in the east, and we exchange information on various topics. And whilst we all work within the similar ways in accordance with our mandated requirements, there are different applications, and I've been able to tell some of the other governors, lead governors, about some of the excellent things that are taking place in MKUH, and also learned a few things from them which have come back and passed on to the executive. The last one was quite fun. Involved in the appointment of the hospital, I and a group of people from the staff, we had to sample 7 different dishes provided by 7 different suppliers. I think if you work that out, it's something like 49 dishes. They were tasters, and of course the early ones we were tasting most of what we were given. The later ones it became a bit of a difficulty, but anyway we got there in the end. We had a marking system, and one of the things that I was very impressed with was that the resulting menu is most extensive. So I think that we've now got a very good provider of food, and it's very good. So moving on, please. I don't think I've got anything to add to those points there. They were all they're all very important, but there's nothing else that I have to add. I think one thing I would say is if you get the opportunity, if you haven't actually accessed the hospital website, it is well worth a look. A lot of information there and kept up to date. Right, moving on, please. Right, what's this? Oh, subject. Oh, yes, yeah. Certainly for the near future, I think that some of these planned activities will be virtual, and one of the more meet the members group things that we want to do is hopefully get something moving on that. One that we had previously that was very popular was a visit by a medical detection dog, and they are trained to locate some cancers by smell, and it was a very impressive presentation. And of course, everybody loved the dog. Right, so moving on. Oh, sorry about this. I think that says it all in the first line. And I just add to this that the one thing I can assure everyone is that the staff welcome feedback, both good and not so good. They will always welcome positive suggestions to improve services. Besides contacting your constituency governor, you could also contact the patient experience manager and the PALS, Patient Advice and Liaison Service. Also, please, if any of you do use the services of the hospital, please complete the friends and family test, because all of these are very helpful to MKUH to make sure that they are keeping up to date and improving services as much as they can. But one thing I will add is that as a member of the board, the Director of Patient Care and Chief Nurse, Nikki Burns-Muir, is a member of the board, and that puts patient care as a top priority, which I think is extremely important. Next slide. List of people there. Some of those have now changed because we've had the latest elections. So last one, please. So finally, come and join us if you're not if you're not a governor. And one of the things that we're always looking out for is volunteers. We've got many volunteers, but there's always room for more if we can get them. So finally, as I mentioned earlier, I will complete my 2 terms, and I've lost my place now. Oh yes, here we go. As a governor, which will be on the 21st of this month. I've thoroughly enjoyed my involvement with many of the staff at the hospital, and will miss working with them. With that, I will say cheerio and offer my sincere best wishes to every single person associated with the hospital who work to look after us with great care. So finally, cheerio, and may your God bless you, everyone. And I will now hand over to Professor Harrison, our excellent CEO. And I want some payment for saying that, Joe.
Thank you very much indeed.
Right. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Alan. Thank you very much for that. So I will say a few words in a moment about you, if I may. But looking ahead, let's have a look at what the hospital is focused on over the next year or so. And without question, what we've seen is a build-up of patients waiting for our services, which none of us want, and we know the potential harm there is for the longer the patients wait for our services. We'll be doing everything that we can to make sure that we operate on as many people as we can, whilst also managing the pressures of continuing to see COVID patients who are COVID positive, and also an increasing pressure through the emergency department for those emergencies that we have to look after over winter in particular. We'll also be very clearly focused on making sure that we invest in technology to support patients in choosing how they are looked after and how we care for individuals, and also making sure that we use it for the best interests of teaching and all different ways of engaging in a way that makes us the most effective healthcare provider and the most efficient at the same time, all underpinned by an absolute focus on safety. There is, as many of you will know, another big agenda, another big meeting going on at the moment as COP26 goes ahead. I would argue, are once again at the forefront of what is an incredibly important agenda, and we will continue to invest in making sure that we are net carbon zero by 2030, in line with our council, who are also incredibly forward-looking with this. And it is interestingly, our challenge is to get to that net carbon zero 10 years ahead of the rest of the NHS, who have set a target of 2040. And so we will do all sorts of different things, you'll see there along the bottom there, to make sure that we do the right thing, not just for this generation, but future generations that come through our organisation. And then our estate, once again, I would suggest that we spend, probably as an executive team, around about half of our time focused on how we can develop and improve our organisation, our hospital, to cope with an ever increasing population in Milton Keynes and the surrounding areas. The plans for the new Women's and Children's Hospital continue to develop alongside our elective surgery centre, and we will make sure that as soon as we get the money for that, we will invest it wisely to increase the capacity in our organisation. And I know it's sort of happened, but it's worth saying that we hosted the new Chief Executive of the NHS, Amanda Pritchard, and our new Secretary of State, Sajid Javid. They came and had a look, and I think we are quoted now by our Secretary of State as being the best hospital in the NHS. So it's one of those unenviable tags to have potentially. If you're at the very top, then there's only one way to go, but I'm delighted, absolutely delighted with all of the hard work that the team here across the organisation has put in to give us such a fantastic reputation. And finally, it's the bit that I like the most about this job. It's to say thank you to the team that have provided such amazing care in such challenging situations for every single individual that comes through, and looking after both the patient and their family and carer in an outstanding fashion. I said I'd come back to Alan. Alan, who has been an absolute superstar in his role as lead governor. A huge, both professional and personal thank you from me to Alan for everything that he has done to promote the governors, to challenge us as an organisation to do the right thing all of the time, and to look after the reputation of this organisation. So thank you very much indeed, Alan. Our volunteers, whilst not always present during 2021, are coming back into the fold and do an outstanding job to support the team here. A big thank you to you. To all of those that continue and have supported our charity that enables places like the Cancer Centre to be such an amazing facility. You raised an enormous amount of money for our organisation. Thank you. And finally, to our community who have looked after the team here throughout very challenging times, who continue to make this hospital a great place to work and a great place as the Chief Exec to lead. A big thank you to all of you. And on that note, I will pass you back over to Alison, our chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Joe. Thank you, everybody. I don't know if I just looked in the question box, and we've had one around our new Maple Centre, which is really asking it. That's from Jill, asking how it works. John kindly has put in a response, effectively saying, I'm sure everybody can have a look at it, but effectively saying this is very much a multidisciplinary approach. I don't know if any colleagues want to add anything further to that. I mean, this is a very innovative way, and it means bringing services together to work very holistically with patients and patient needs. So it's a very exciting project. I don't know if anybody wants to add anything to that. And unless, I'm just saying, yeah, I'm just checking. We have another question just come in. I've just refreshed my question box. From Anonymous, would you say that the governors and NED selected are representative of Milton Keynes? Are there ethnic minorities on both or either of these leadership groups? Well, I guess that's one to me. What I would say is that certainly on the non-executive body, in terms of ethnic minority representation, we have Haida Hussein. I would say on the executive side at the moment, it's probably more gender mix than anything else. I think from the other organisations I've worked in, I think we've got a 50-50 split between male and female members, which is significant. But as I think I alluded to earlier on, in terms of our equality, diversity and inclusion agenda, there is a big piece of work going on. We're aware that we want to improve that, and going forward, that's very much a focus for us. And in fact, in my appointment as well, it was very clear in the job specification for me that was a key area, and it's something I've been very heavily involved in my previous organisations, where I was a non-executive and also chair in mental health, learning disability and community services. So we're not where we want to be yet, and we recognise that, but we're certainly taking steps to address that. In terms of the Milton Keynes mix, we have our certainly our non-executive directors come from a number of areas, some local, some not quite so local. We've got two posts to recruit to next year, as we have 2 of our non-executive directors who have coming to the ends of their terms. And we are currently pulling together our advertisement for that, and we are looking very much to try and recruit locally. But obviously the Milton Keynes services do cover into Buckinghamshire and across into Bedfordshire. So when we look to those appointments, we do very much recognise how far our services extend. And I would say I might have to refer to Joe, because it's made me think, actually, as the new chair, I know where some of my executive colleagues live, but I know many of them have worked in the patch for a long time, but I'm not entirely sure where they are all based. But certainly I think majority are very close. I hope that's a fair. Yeah, sorry, that's a fair reflection, Joe.
Yes, it is. Thank you, Alison. And I think the key for me from an executive perspective is bringing experience, bringing knowledge and expertise into an organisation so that we can make sure that we're doing the right thing and learn from best practice everywhere. So that for me, in some respects, I would. It's nice to have some executives that are local. Actually, I actively encourage a broader spread from an executive perspective.
Thanks, Joe. That's really helpful. Yeah, and you're absolutely right. I mean, in an ideal world, yes, we'd have a pool of all the people that we wanted on a local basis, but often you have to spread further to get the expertise that you need to run the organisation. But as I say, it's an ongoing agenda, so I'm sure that question will come up again, and hopefully next year we'll be able to present a bit more on that. I'll just check. I don't think there were any further questions coming into the box. Nope. So really, it just leaves it for me to, I'll just check my agenda, yes, for me to close now. And really, it's just to say my first comment, I think, just reflecting on Alan's presentation, is I will endeavour to live up to the Governor's expectations. I'm thoroughly enjoying the role. It's been an unusual time to start, but as I say, I've had tremendous support, and thank you, Alan, again. You've been a great help and very informative, so thanks for that. And I'd also like to thank colleagues this evening for their presentations. Hopefully those attending have found them helpful and informative, and I want to thank everyone who has attended, has taken the time to attend today. And as we've already said, I think during this evening, that we do appreciate feedback. There are always things we can learn or pick up on, but also anything you think that is particularly good, we also like to hear about that as well. So please do feedback to us. I would like to reiterate what Joe has said, that we are so grateful for the support of our community and partners, and actually with the way or with what we're facing, it looks like going into the winter and probably early next year, that's going to be particularly important as we proceed further with delivering our services and trying to catch up with the backlog. So we fully intend to play an active part with our community and our partners. But what I would like to do, though, is just end on another very big thank you to our staff, Team MKUH. You have been extraordinary and in an extraordinary time. So thank you all very much, and safe journey for everybody that's travelling. Thank you. Bye-bye.